The 70s and 80s were this weird moment where horror didn't need a massive budget to absolutely wreck you. You'd sit down expecting harmless entertainment and instead get nightmare fuel that stuck with you for decades. And some of these films are still terrifying audiences today. Jeff Goldblum spent upwards of 5 hours every morning in the makeup chair getting buried under silicone and latex prosthetics that restricted his movement, his ability to eat, and even his ability to use the restroom during 12-hour shooting days. The Fly follows scientist Seth Brundle, who perfects teleportation pods but accidentally fuses his DNA with a housefly during a test, triggering a grotesque transformation as his body deteriorates into a man-fly hybrid.
No, really, what is it? It's like hairs or something.
Everything seems successful at first, but a housefly slipped into the pod with him, and his DNA begins merging with the insects in a grotesque transformation that strips away his humanity piece by piece. According to makeup artist Chris Wallace, the transformation was divided into 7 distinct stages of decay, with the final suit so heavy Goldblum had to be physically supported between takes. Goldblum stayed so committed, he suggested the museum scene where his character stores fallen off body parts like teeth and fingernails in a medicine cabinet. The film was fueled by a real romance between Goldblum and Gina Davis, who were dating during production, with Davis later admitting the mental toll of watching her partner literally rot away was severe. Mel Brooks financed it through his production company, but stayed off the credits, fearing audiences would expect comedy. Made for $9 to $15 million, it grossed over $60.6 million worldwide, becoming director David Cronenberg's biggest commercial hit, with the tagline "Be afraid, be very afraid," becoming an immediate cultural phenomenon despite studio fears the body horror would be too repulsive for mainstream audiences. Billy Warlock was at the height of teen idol fame when he took the role in Society, with his agents horrified by the graphic themes, fearing it would blacklist him from mainstream television. Society follows Bill Whitney, a wealthy teenager living in Beverly Hills who feels like he doesn't fit in with his high society family and suspects they're involved in something sinister. After hearing a distorted audio recording of a family party that sounds like a violent ritual, Bill discovers that the upper class isn't just socially different. They are a completely different species that literally feeds on the poor in grotesque body-merging ceremonies. Fresh off a daytime Emmy for Days of Our Lives, Warlock was cast in Baywatch shortly after filming, and because Society was shelved for 3 years due to its disturbing content, fans who knew him as wholesome lifeguard were traumatized to see him battling grotesque monsters and biological sludge. The legendary climax was a 30-minute sequence of biological meldings born from director Brian Yuzna's nightmares about people's skin melting together, with effects artist Screaming Mad George drawing inspiration from Salvador Dali's paintings. The production utilized unprecedented amounts of food-grade slime, with 14 puppeteers manipulating massive latex prosthetics beneath floorboards, and one effect involving a head being turned inside out was so repulsive Screaming Mad George refused to look at it during filming. The film was a celebrated hit in Europe, where critics appreciated its class satire, becoming a top 10 hit in the UK, while being completely banned or ignored in the US, but major American distributors refused to touch it, viewing it as too sick for audiences, sitting on a shelf for 3 years until finally getting limited release in 1992. Despite initial domestic failure, it was recognized as a masterpiece of social commentary decades after it was nearly buried, with its overseas theatrical success proving what American studios were too afraid to embrace. Karen Black's performance playing 4 different characters in Trilogy of Terror required her to be on screen for nearly the entire production, but the final segment featuring a tribal fetish doll possessed by a hunting spirit proved the most physically demanding. This anthology film tells 3 distinct stories starring Karen Black, but it is the final segment that cemented its place in horror history, with the first 2 segments showing tales of a student obsessed with his teacher and a sibling rivalry involving witchcraft. However, the energy shifts entirely in the 3rd act when Amelia buys a tribal fetish doll containing the spirit of a prehistoric hunter, and after the restraining chain falls off, the tiny warrior comes to life and stalks her through her apartment in a relentless claustrophobic chase. According to director Dan Curtis, the doll was a series of complex puppets jerked around by stagehands with invisible wires, and Black had to perform intense fight sequences against a puppet that actually scratched and bruised her with its sharp teeth and spear during the frantic wrestling matches. She spent days crawling on the floor, throwing herself against furniture, with low-angle shots making the doll feel like a towering threat. The doll became an accidental icon, with Child's Play creator Don Mancini stating it was the primary inspiration for Chucky, specifically how it created constant danger by staying low and out of sight. Richard Albane designed a mechanism allowing the doll's mouth to move in a shredding motion, with the high-pitched chattering war cry created by layering animal growls and speeding them up. Produced for $350,000 as part of the Network Movie of the Week, the film captured a massive viewing audience when it aired March 4, 1975, traumatizing a generation of children who stayed up past bedtime and earning a dedicated cult following with a high-definition release decades later. Elizabeth Montgomery was desperate to prove her range after 8 years as Samantha Stevens on Bewitched, specifically choosing the victim to play a damsel grounded in reality rather than magic. In this classic made-for-TV thriller, Montgomery stars as Kate, a woman traveling to her sister's secluded house during a massive rainstorm, who finds the place empty with her sister nowhere to be found. As the storm cuts off communication and travel, Kate becomes trapped in the house with a growing sense of dread, unaware that her sister has been murdered and the killer is still lurking in the shadows, turning the estate into a deadly cat-and-mouse game. Montgomery worked with director Herschel Doherty to ensure her performance felt authentically terrified rather than TV safe, launching a new phase as Queen of the TV movie with acclaimed films like A Case of Rape and The Legend of Lizzie Borden. Her ability to draw a massive audience to a dark thriller paved the way for other sitcom stars to pursue gritty Movie of the Week projects. Screenwriter Merwin Gerard had to write cliffhanger beats every 12 to 15 minutes for commercial breaks, with Kate constantly putting herself in danger just as the screen fades to black. Produced for $350,000, the entire film was shot on existing studio lots and a single house location, with the film's reliance on shadows and sound design rather than expensive special effects becoming its greatest strength. Despite being a ratings hit when it aired November 14, 1972, the film nearly vanished for decades until a high-definition restoration became a surprise success. Larry Drake's portrayal of gentle, mentally challenged Bubba Ritter was so convincing that casting directors initially believed Drake actually had the disability, and that 17-day shoot effectively typecast him for life. This chilling tale centers on Bubba, a mentally challenged man with a heart of gold who lives in a small southern town where a young girl is injured in an accident, and a group of local bigots, led by the mailman, wrongly blame Bubba. They form a lynch mob and execute him disguised as a scarecrow, only to learn he actually saved the girl from a dog attack. And soon after, a mysterious scarecrow begins appearing in the fields as the vigilantes face gruesome accidental deaths one by one. Drake spent significant time researching speech patterns and mannerisms, and this performance is widely credited as why he was cast as Benny on the legal drama, earning him 2 consecutive Emmys. Drake often noted in later years that the stigma of being so good at playing the simpleton led to perpetual typecasting. Director Frank DeFelitta had to navigate network censorship, forbidding explicit gore, with the most famous instance involving a woodchipper death, where unable to show blood, the crew filmed a scene where a character eats a sandwich, and as the woodchipper kills someone off-screen, the camera cuts to slow-motion ketchup landing on a white plate. This ketchup shot became viral among horror fans as far more disturbing than actual blood because of the domestic context. A catastrophic fire near the filming location cost them an entire day, forcing double shifts to finish. When it premiered October 24, 1981, it was a massive rating success, and constant syndication, plus an eventual restoration, turned it into one of the most profitable independent horror properties ever created for television. Scott Jacoby stayed isolated from the rest of the cast during Bad Ronald to capture genuine social awkwardness, confined to cramped, dimly lit wall sets while family actors filmed in brightly lit areas. This unsettling psychological thriller follows Ronald, a socially stunted teenager who accidentally kills a young girl, leading his mother to hide him within the walls of their large Victorian home. When his mother dies during surgery, leaving Ronald forgotten inside the house, a new family moves in with no idea they're sharing their home with someone living in the walls, stealing food and watching their daughters with delusional obsession. The production battled between the source material's depravity and broadcast censorship, with the network forcing the central tragedy to be rewritten as an accident, whereas the Jack Vance novel depicted something far more sinister, involving sexual themes and premeditated violence. Set designers created a modular house, allowing cameras to film Jacoby inside crawl spaces, while other actors performed on the other side simultaneously, with this physical separation helping Jacoby maintain the character's sense of being an outsider looking in. The biggest viral talking point is how Ronald survived in the walls, with the crew joking about his magical fridge because the film never explains how he lasted months on one box of groceries. The film's set design was so influential, it inspired a specific subgenre of home intruder horror, becoming a cult classic because of the urban legend quality that someone could be watching from inside your walls. The first 20 minutes of When a Stranger Calls are widely considered the most terrifying opening in horror history, directly inspiring Scream's opening, and this was actually a remake of director Fred Walton's earlier short film The Sitter. The film begins with teenager Jill Johnson babysitting for a wealthy family when she receives unsettling phone calls from a man who repeatedly asks, Have you checked the children? When police trace the call, they deliver the bone-chilling news that the calls are coming from inside the house, and 7 years later, after the killer escapes from a psychiatric facility, he returns to target Jill, who is now a mother herself. Walton spent his own money filming the short as a calling card for investors, then reshot it with Carol Kane when he secured the $1.5 million budget and expanded the story into a detective thriller. The terrifying killer was played by British actor Tony Beckley, who was actually dying of cancer during production, with his illness contributing to the pathetic gaunt look of the character. Despite failing health, he performed his own stunts in the finale where he's pursued through a crowded bar, passing away shortly after completion. The rating board originally voted unanimously for a lower rating because it lacked gore or nudity, but the chairman was so personally unsettled by the psychological intensity, he called for an unprecedented second vote, flipping it to R, produced for $1.5 million. It grossed over $21 million, establishing the call as coming from inside the house line as a permanent cultural fixture. When the Night Stalker premiered January 11, 1972, it shattered every record for made-for-television films, earning a 33.2 rating and 48 share, meaning nearly half of all televisions in America were tuned in. This film introduces Carl Kolchak, a cynical, fast-talking newspaper reporter in Las Vegas, who covers a series of bizarre murders where victims are drained of all their blood. Despite ridicule from his editor and active suppression from police desperate to protect tourism, Kolchak's investigation leads him to believe a literal vampire is responsible, forcing him to track the killer alone, armed with a cross and a stake. The massive success was entirely unexpected by the studio, who initially worried a vampire in a modern city was too silly for serious audiences, leading to a sequel and the TV series with producer Dan Curtis and screenwriter Richard Matheson creating a new genre of urban supernatural procedural. Darren McGavin was the primary architect of the character's persona, hating the original wardrobe and personally buying the cheap seersucker suit, straw boater hat, and distinct camera that became trademarks because he wanted the character to look perpetually out of time and out of fashion. McGavin also insisted on the character's rapid-fire cynical narration, which he felt gave the film a hard-boiled detective feel. Decades later, Chris Carter cited McGavin's character as the primary inspiration for Fox Mulder, even casting McGavin in The X-Files as a father of the paranormal figure. The vampire was portrayed as a feral, diseased animal rather than romantic aristocrat, with Barry Atwater performing entirely silent, using only animalistic grunts and hisses to make the monster feel truly alien. Steven Spielberg was given a $450,000 budget and 10-day schedule for Duel, begging for 3 extra days to finish in just 13 days total. Directed by a young Spielberg, this film follows David Mann, an ordinary businessman driving across the California desert who overtakes a rusty, slow-moving tanker truck, unintentionally offending the unseen driver. What begins as minor road rage escalates into a lethal game of cat and mouse, as the massive truck begins stalking David, and the brilliance lies in its simplicity as we never see the driver's face, with the truck itself becoming the monster. Spielberg drew a map of the entire highway on a long roll of paper, marking where every shot would take place to avoid wasting time moving cameras, using 5 cameras simultaneously to capture multiple angles with editors working on footage as it was being shot. The speed of production was so frantic, critics were stunned by the high level of technical sophistication when it premiered, launching Spielberg from TV director to the most sought-after filmmaker in Hollywood, leading directly to his hiring for Jaws. Spielberg was adamant the truck should be seen as a sentient monster, personally auditioning 7 trucks before choosing the 1955 Peterbilt because its face looked menacing. He added dead license plates from several states, suggesting the driver had killed people across the country, and when the truck goes over the cliff, Spielberg layered in a monster roar to make its death sound like a dying prehistoric creature. The film was such a massive hit, the network released it theatrically overseas, with Spielberg given funding to shoot 2 more days, bringing runtime to 90 minutes, and the theatrical version grossing over $9 million internationally.